it's inevitable anytime I talk to somebody that in the wine region that climate change, global warming comes up. Have you seen much of that where you're at?
Oh, very much so. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, honestly, we've been feeling it and acting on it for 15 to 20 years. We've been noticing hotter, drier, and just more variables, more extremes. And so we've addressed it in numerous ways. Our irrigation regimen has changed. And that's been for a long time. We do longer, deeper irrigations rather than shorter because we want to send the water deep and send the roots deep into the ground.
Right.
And we won't start that until after veraison, which is until after the grapes change color, just because we want that set and the shoots to be in position before we would ever add water. But we've also purchased shade cloth, which we utilize in some of our blocks on what we call the afternoon side of our vines, which is where the sun is setting over here and where it'll feed in on those vines late in the afternoon. We could protect some of those areas from sort of direct sunlight. So those are investments and changes that we've made out in the vineyard. And then here in the winery, we've purchased equipment that allows us to process fruit more quickly if we need to, and to be able to, with an optical sorter, sort out things that we might not like depending on what happens at harvest.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a few more questions. I'm going to try and see if I can get this picture up of your estate.
Okay.
See, here we go.
There we go. That's it.
So you were nestled up against the Mayacamas Mountains, and you're in a very, very sheltered little, what they call it, a microclimate or a mesoclimate, or what, I don't know the correct term.
Yeah, we're basically, I mean, you can see the mountains right there, and just to our right is sort of where Spring Mountain comes down. So we're the northernmost part of the western benchland of Napa Valley. So these are alluvial soils, right up against the Mayacamas range soils that wash down and different over many years. And so it was, by pure luck that we have what has turned out to be a great vineyard, because when we moved here in the early 70s, my parents didn't know anything about grape growing or winemaking, and by pure chance bought what has turned out to be a remarkable piece of ground.
So when your parents bought it, was this just sort of a summer home, or just to get away from the
No, actually it was sort of more of I guess it was what I'd call a good midlife, and it wasn't really midlife. My dad was 39 years old, and I was very young. We were living in North San Diego County, where he was a medical doctor and had his own practice. And at age 39, he just made a decision that he wanted to raise his 5 children in a more rural environment. And he and my mom, although they were both Southern Californians, my mom had been raised in LA. They had met at Stanford and had some familiarity with Northern California, had some friends that had actually moved here and came and visited and fell in love with it. And one thing that's really important to note is that in the early 70s, Napa Valley was completely undiscovered. So land prices it was $4,000 an acre, and there was
oh my goodness,
land available. There was just nothing going on. So for us, it was just, because I'm one of 5 children, my parents had a handful of parameters. They needed a house large enough for 5 children. My dad wanted to drive a tractor, go figure. He just didn't want to be going through his medical offices anymore, I guess, and treating patients at that time.
Fine.
And my mother was an avid gardener, and they chanced upon this old historic estate that had been established in the late 1800s. And it was named Spottswoode, and they bought it. And the next thing you know, I mean, we had been in just a new home that we had built where we lived in Southern California for just a couple of years. And we sold this home, and all of a sudden the 5 of us kids and my mom and dad were living at Spottswoode in St. Helena.
And this was what year they bought the estate?
1972. So,
wow.
but yeah, it had been established in the late 1800s by a German immigrant. Napa Valley was primarily settled by both German and Italian immigrants. And George Schoenwald, who developed and established Spottswoode, was a German immigrant who had been a hotel manager actually at a hotel called the Hotel Del Monte, which was down in Monterey. And it was built around the same time as the Hotel del Coronado, which most people are probably familiar with because it still exists in San Diego.
San Diego, right?
Yeah, it was a beautiful old Victorian hotel that was a destination hotel. When people used to go places, it was at the end of the rail line, and people would go and spend summers there. So anyway, he was the manager there, and then ultimately decided to build Spottswoode as sort of a summer residence. And he brought design elements from the Hotel Del Monte, which burned and no longer exists. It actually burned once because of a disgruntled employee. They rebuilt it, it burned again, and then they moved out to Pebble Beach. And so the original place where the hotel was no longer exists, but he built Spottswoode with some of the design elements from the Hotel Del Monte, and it was built in the late 1800s. So it's this beautiful old Victorian home that needed an awful lot of work when we got here. It was reasonably run down and in need of some help. And so luckily we got here and fixed it up. And then it was, at the time that we moved here, it was all old. It was post-Prohibition varietals by then. So what was planted in the vineyard at that time was Petite Sirah, Napa Gamay, and French Colombard and Green Hungarian. So all of those grapes were being sold to what was then the Napa Valley Cooperative, which was really controlled by Gallo, and the grapes were sold at $200 or $300 a ton. Old prune vines. It was a very rough way to make a living. So like I said, we really, pure luck. My parents knew nothing about grape growing or winemaking. Maybe they had Matus, maybe they had Lancers, maybe Blue Nun. They were not fine wine drinkers. Wow. This was a lifestyle change, and we just landed on a great piece of ground.
Just you mentioning those grape varieties is just like, talk about a time, moving back in time, the time machine. It's just, French Colombard and Napa Gamay and things. It's like, which I don't think you find too much anymore in Napa, do you?
You don't find too much of it. And some people call it Valdigue now, right? Or Valdigue. But no, there's not a lot of Napa Gamay. There is still some Petite Sirah. There's certainly, I haven't seen French Colombard in a long, long time. And I don't know about Green Hungarian. I don't think that's out there either.
Yeah, I don't think the demand is too high for French Colombard. Anywhere in California, but much less Napa Valley. So
I think not.
I know in general you talk about these are alluvial soils because the rain washes down from the mountains. But can you just describe a little bit more detail what these alluvial soils bring to the wines?
Yeah, what alluvial soils allow for. So we're probably between 250 and 300 feet, sort of at quote elevation, right? We're not at a high elevation here by any stretch, but the alluvial soils are the soils that have washed down for the hillsides, and we're up. The Napa River is well to our east by probably, let's say, a mile. And so what you get with alluvial soils, it's more rocky, a little bit more sandy. There is some clay in them as well, but what they are is they're really well drained. So if you think about a grapevine, like right now, as I was mentioning when we started, they're shooting out green growth, and they're really vegetatively just shooting out because it's springtime, and they're happy to do that. You can see how green the vineyard looks in that photo, and I would say that's generally probably a photo of the vineyard in July. I'm going to guess, right, just because I can see that it's been hedged and that sort of thing. But anyway, they're really growing out, and then there's a lot of green and vegetative growth, and then in the life cycle of any tree or of any fruit-bearing plant, and that is a vine, of course, flowering will happen, and then they will set fruit. And then at a certain point in time, what you want is for the vine to get the message that it's time for me to stop pushing out this green growth, and it's time for me to focus on ripening this fruit on my vine. So why the reason that alluvial soils are positive for that is that because they're well drained, the water will drop out of the soils more quickly. So in other words, the vines, the feet of the vines, or the root system of the vines are not wet and sitting in water. So you can get that messaging to the vine that, hey, stop growing this green growth and start focusing on ripening your fruit, right, and end up with good tonnage amounts. We're anywhere from we project based upon 3.4 tons of the acre. We're more in that we get anywhere, depending on the rootstock, 3.5 to 5 tons of the acre. 5 would be high, but that would be like with 5C, which is a particularly prolific rootstock.
And I read on the website that you have had to replant due to phylloxera. How long ago was that? Was that when your parents first moved in? Or?
Yeah, no, what happened, so when we first moved here, again, my dad had sold his practice and literally replanted the vineyard and started out replanting it. We had Rick Foreman, who was a neighbor across the street, who was part of Sterling and then started his own winery called Foreman. Right. And my parents met Justin Meyer, who went on to found Silver Oak with Ray Duncan, who was an old family friend. Knew him as well. So they helped us make some determinations of what to plant. So when we first replanted, it's a 45-acre estate total with roughly 40 in vineyard land. And so we planted about 9 acres each of Sauvignon Blanc and Zinfandel. And then in the back part of the vineyard up against closer to the mountain, we planted about 20 acres of Cabernet Sauvignon. And those were 3 large blocks, all AXR1 rootstock, which is the capital A cross with root.
Right.
whatever. And so we used all AXR 1 rootstock. And so it was replanted in sort of two sections in 1973 and 1975. And then in about late 75, lo and behold, there was a lot of money being spent and zero income because our dad was not working anymore. My dad was not working anymore. And so my dad had to go back to work, and he was an emergency room doctor here for just a few years up at Salina Hospital. And then he very unexpectedly, when he was just 44 years old, so 5 years after we moved here, he died of a heart attack.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he died, and he was leaving my mom a widow with this property, and of course with 5 children, some of whom are in college, and some, I was still in high school, and there were a couple younger than me. So thankfully our mom chose to stay. She was a remarkable person, had a sense of, she had already fallen in love with it here. She had made good friends, or obviously we were all here and sort of settled into our lives here. And she also, most importantly, had a livelihood because she had grapes to sell. So even before my father had died, they had sold, Robert Mondavi had bought some of the Napa Gamay, interestingly enough.
There you go. Okay.
Winery.
I remember that one, right?
Yeah, but we sold like to Frog's Leap. In fact, we kind of helped Frog's Leap into the Zinfandel business because they were buying Cabernet Sauvignon and Sauvignon Blanc from us. And we were like, can't you please buy some Zinfandel too? And so they did. And so, you know, was selling up to Dennis Johns at the St. Clement. I mean,
right.
Here, but you'll remember some of these.
Sure.
And then ultimately, so my mom just realized that she could stay here and sell grapes and have an income. So she did stay, and she went to people initially like Joe Heights, of whom she was scared to death. He was a bit of a curmudgeon. He agreed to buy the
just a bit, yeah.
And I'm saying that in the nicest way. And she, like Mike Robbins at what was then Spring Mountain.
Mountain, sure.
Before it's Falcon Crest, and apparently he had a desk like the size of our whole house, you know, and she was afraid to walk in, but he bought some of our grapes. And then ultimately it was both the Duckhorn families and the Schaefer families who were good family friends, and they started buying the fruit, and they really liked the Cabernet. And based upon their sense of its quality, they really encouraged my mom to sort of follow through on the shared dream that she and my dad had, which was to make wine and call it Spottswoode, because that was the name of the estate that we had purchased. So in 1982, Mom hired Tony Soder, who was our founding winemaker, who's a remarkable individual. Really, he came in, he felt strongly about this piece of ground, and he set the tone in so many ways. He looked at Spottswoode and wanted to make a wine that truly was representative of its time, which means its vintage, and of its place, its site. Right. He had a good sense of balance and elegance and beauty, the beauty that we get in California. So he had a real sense of what he wanted to achieve. And then about 3 years later, in '85, he wanted to have a real strong connection with the vineyard. So he took over the vineyard management because he wanted to have that intimate connection with, I'm out here growing these grapes, I know what they're going to become, and then I can work with them better in the vineyard. So he was kind of the first to do that, and he introduced organic farming practices that year. So we brought organic, we were the first in Napa Valley to start farming organically. We were certified in 1992, and we've never looked back, and of course since then we've done so much more environmentally. But it was a great, except for you know, Dad dying, which was very significant because of my mom's immense perseverance and belief in this place, and you know, really making an incredible choice in Tony Soder. We were launched and got going with our 1980.
And Tony was with you for how many years?
He was with us as winemaker for 10 years, and then he remained, so through the 91 vintage, and then he remained with us consulting through 1997, and then ultimately he moved to Oregon. So he has a wonderful Pinot Noir, as I'm sure you've had his wonderful Pinot out of his Mineral Springs vineyard. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I haven't had those wines, but I know he was a tremendous winemaker. It still is. So.
And he still is.
Yeah. So in 1972, when you started, you hadn't made the Cabernet yet. You were selling grapes, but talking about a different era in Napa. I mean, how many wineries were there in Napa at that time? Maybe 30 or 40, or?
Oh, something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. There were very few, you know, and it was sort of dominated by the big houses. I mean, the notion of sort of small, you know, wineries. I mean, they were there. There was St. Clement, Frog's Leap had started. Duckhorn had started in the late 70s because we didn't start until 1982. But really, if you think about it, it was a lot of the big houses. I mean, you know, Martini and Christian Brothers and
Furniture, things like that.
And yeah, it's quite remarkable when you think about it. And then Robert Mondavi, of course, I mean, Charles Krug, and then Robert Mondavi broke out on his own. And So it was a really, we just by pure luck got here at the cusp of really interesting things happen. Of course, the Davies had moved here to get transferred going, the
Sure, for
Chapelets.
sure.
Already mentioned the Schaefers. So there were a lot of families that had sort of just by kind of luck had come up at around the same time.
Great. Well, we have 3 wines today we're going to discuss and taste. Hopefully people have the wines in front of them, but let's start with the Sauvignon Blanc.
Okay.
2019, is that what you have? That's what I have.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about that vintage and about Sauvignon Blanc in general at Spottswoode.
So Sauvignon Blanc in general, I'll start there just to kind of give the backdrop, but we've been making Sauvignon Blanc since 1984, as I mentioned, when my dad first planted the vineyard, that we had about 9 acres there. I didn't get to the replanting, but I'll get to that in a moment because that's where you had started that question. I just remembered that. But the Sauvignon Blanc we started making in 1984 because we had it in our estate and Tony was interested in it. And it turns out that my mom quickly became very enamored of it. It was her favorite wine. I mean, it was so funny in her mind. If we hadn't made Cabernet Sauvignon, she would have been perfectly happy because she just loved the Sauvignon Blanc.
Okay, right.
No, she loved our Cabernet too, but she loved the Sauvignon Blanc. But anyway, so we started making 84 fully from our estate. And then, and so we made it from our estate through the 1990 vintage. And then it was in the late 80s that we discovered phylloxera in our vineyard. And by then, I was working at Spottswoode by then. I started here in 1987. And so when Tony had seen phylloxera out in Napa Valley, there was still a lot of denial in the late 80s about its existence, but it was there. He had seen it. So he had come to my mom and me and said, look, when we get phylloxera, and we will because we're on AXR1 rootstock, let's have a plan. So our plan was that we would get rid of that or sacrifice that acreage that had been devoted to Sauvignon Blanc and put Cabernet in the ground. So we did that after the 90 harvest. We ripped out the Sauvignon Blanc, and in 91 we brought it back and planted Cabernet, obviously not on AXR1, on a lot of different rootstocks. And so at that time we thought, well, wow, are we going to still continue to make Sauvignon Blanc? Well, we decided to do so. So we developed a relationship with Larry Hyde down in the Carneros, which we have to this day. And then we had 2 growers up in Calistoga, the Toffanelli family and the Frediani family, again, going back to that Italian heritage. And we bought Semillon from Toffanelli and then Sauvignon Blanc from the Fredianis. And then what happened, and so we continued to make our Sauvignon Blanc, and it was really good still, and we loved it. And then ultimately what happened is because land in Napa Valley has become so valuable, people are hesitant for obvious reasons, to plant Sauvignon Blanc on the best ground. So, so for example, the Frediani vineyard where the Sauvignon Blanc was is literally across the street from the Isley vineyard up in Calistoga off of Pickett Lane. And so when that block went, just through age and through attrition, they had to replant it. They planted Cabernet. So then it was like, now where are we going to find good Sauvignon Blanc? So I remember picking up the phone and talking to Larry Hyde and saying, Larry, we're really looking for some more Sauvignon Blanc. And he said, there's a great vineyard over on Sonoma Mountain. You really ought to take a look at it, called the Farina Vineyard. And we thought, well, we had never thought about, Sonoma because we're here in Napa Valley. Looked at the vineyard, felt like it was a great vineyard, and so started buying from that vineyard. And then since that time, we're buying from another vineyard up on Sonoma Mountain. And then we've added other growers here in Napa Valley, one up on Atlas Peak, because we want that sort of mountain fruit character. And so we've selected very specific vineyard sites to bring in different elements to make our Sauvignon Blanc every year. So the point of all that is it's a Napa Sonoma blend. We have just 1.07 acres of Sauvignon Blanc in our own estate vineyard because it was our mom's favorite wine and our favorite grape. And so we planted that back in 2000. So 9 years after we had ripped it out, we brought some back in. And it's a great block, and we love making it. But anyway, with our Sauvignon Blanc, we bring in the fruit, we whole cluster press it. I'm going to really simplify this, but we whole cluster press it, let it settle overnight, and then all of it is fermented. There's like 200 separate fermentations that go into making this wine. We ferment it in stainless steel barrels, so literally like 70-gallon barrels. Okay. That's about 50% of it, and then we use a combination of new and used French oak. That's about 40 to 45% of it, and then we have 2 cement eggs, 1 ceramic egg from Australia, and then 1 amphora, which is clay. And so we do all of these unique separate fermentations. We're building texture, we're building mouthfeel, we're building complexity. We lees stir. It does not go through malolactic. And so we're trying to make a Sauvignon Blanc that, again, just like how we make our Cabernet, that embodies and illustrates the beauty that we get here in California, but with great tension and energy, a sense of restraint, that sense of elegance, you know, a true, what we consider a classic fine wine.
Yeah, I like your notion of the sense of restraint, because I really get that in this wine. It's not this tutti frutti, you know, in your face Sauvignon Blanc with grapefruit and things. It's got that nice classic, you know, aroma. I tried a little bit earlier of the freshly cut grass and hay and a little bit of spearmint, but it really has lovely complexity. It's very elegant, beautiful.
Yeah, and sort of pit fruit. You know, we're looking for that nice white peach and maybe a little bit of key lime sometimes, just things like that. So it's kind of building in those layers of complexity. So I'm glad that was apparent to you.
And how many cases of that do you make in a typical year?
3,800 cases a year is our ambition every single year.
Okay.
So it's a relatively limited production. We sell it direct to consumer. Well, all of our, I mean, we're under 10,000 case a year winery total. So about 3,800 cases of Sauvignon Blanc, roughly 2,000 cases of the Lindenhurst, and then about 4,000 cases of the estate Cabernet is our goal every year.
Okay. Just to move in a different direction, but on that, you said you're around 10,000 cases, or a little under. And obviously now, I was talking to a producer the other day, and he was saying how eerily quiet Napa Valley is now without visitors. I mean, you see a little bit of traffic in the morning, people coming to work, a little bit late in the afternoon when they leave. But describe what Napa's like right now. It has to be a little strange.
It is a little strange. I mean, in a way, it kind of harkens back to, you know, again, I'm dating myself, but a time when things here were just much quieter. And it's, you know, for us, it's interesting. Like, I'm still coming to the office every day because I walk here, and obviously we're not all here. Most of us are working from home, and that's really, really important. But it is quiet in the valley. There are restaurants doing takeout, which is great to see. There is hope that things, I think people are really itching to get out and start doing things, but clearly we need to do this all in a very, very reasonable and careful approach to make sure that we keep everything. Yes. But it's very quiet here. I mean, honestly, to be out on the road and just be able to drive to Napa and not have to think about traffic is just something that hasn't been the case. I can't tell you in how long. You know, it's very, and you know, and a lot of it is, yes, it's tourism, it's people who are visiting, but a lot of it is people on the road, those of us who work here, right? So most of the traffic in Napa Valley is actually, if you think about all the hospitality businesses, be it wineries, restaurants, hotels, it's people coming in to work.
Of course.
And they're coming in because land prices here are so high, they can be driving in from Napa is relatively close. Calistoga is very close, but Santa Rosa, up in Lake County, Middletown, down to American Canyon, or out near Vacaville or Fairfield. So people are having to drive in to work here, and that is a big part of our traffic as well.
And as far as sales, I mean, obviously you're not one of these large wineries where they really depend on a lot of tourists every day, but I'm sure you do get some tourists. But have you been affected much at all with what's going on?
Yeah, we're definitely feeling it. I mean, we are being affected. We're right now is when we're offering our wines to our direct mailing list, and sales are a little bit slower than we had anticipated them being, and it certainly makes sense because, and especially, you know, sort of the biggest hit, interestingly, was sort of that second 2 weeks of March, kind of when it first hit, right, where people were like, whoa, you know, and just kind of, we were all the same way, right? Because this was so new. It was kind of like there was talk of it, all of a sudden it became very real, very fast. So that is sort of the time frame, that moment in time, that sort of 2 weeks when it feels like it was the biggest hit. Now our wines, because a lot of it is sold online, our wines are selling, and that's really gratifying to see, and it's very important to us. But in terms of, you know, our ability to welcome guests to the winery, that was going to account for about 10% of our gross revenue in 2020. I would suggest that us being able to hit that it won't happen, because we're not going to be able to make up for the people that we haven't been able to have visit here. And even when we can invite guests back to Spottswoode, it's going to be in a different way. We're not going to be able to have, I mean, we used to have groups of maybe 8, but we're not going to be able to combine groups. People are going to be able to come up together, but it's going to be a different way that we're able to welcome them here in order to retain proper, you know, to keep everybody safe.
Right. Well, I've been hosting some of these webinars recently with some Italian producers, especially up in Piedmont.
Yes.
Barolo and Barbaresco are,
Yes.
the signature wines. And they said that, yes, obviously people can't come to the wineries and tasting rooms to taste wine or purchase wine. But on the other hand, because they have wines that age for so long,
Exactly.
that if it's continuing for 6 months or even a year, God forbid, but these wines are not going to go anywhere. These wines are going to go anywhere. So I would imagine that with your estate Cabernet, at least, that's kind of the story as well. You don't have to sell it in the next few months. It would be
Absolutely not, and that's also true, to be honest with you. Like our Sauvignon Blanc, our 17 Sauvignon Blanc right now is so amazing. So our Sauvignon Blancs hold up absolutely beautifully as well. So is the 16. So we're not worried about any of these wines. And for us, it's all about, because we do sell wine to. And we sell obviously in Illinois. We sell in most of the states in the union, and we sell and export as well. And we view this as all of the people that bring our wines in, that buy our wines from us and sell them. They're all our partners. We view them all as our friends and as our partners. So we're here for them when they're ready. We're keeping in close touch with them, letting them know that we're here to support them every single way that we can. But we are not. Yeah, we're not impatient. We know it's going to take patience, and we're here and able to offer that and to make that happen. So, we are extremely fortunate in many ways.
Good. Speaking of Sauvignon Blanc, we have one question here from Jeb Kuiper.
Okay.
He says, "Can you tell more of the story about Mary's Block and the Sauvignon Blanc?"
Yes, I can. So again, as I've said, my mom's name was Mary, and her favorite wine was Sauvignon Blanc. It was so funny because when we would give tours, she would always come up here, and if there was any extra left over, she would take it home and have it. And she wasn't always drinking alone. She had many friends, so don't think she was down there getting soused. It's not what it was at all. She just absolutely loved our Sauvignon Blanc. And so when we replanted this block in 2000, that was really something that was important to my mom, to have Sauvignon Blanc back in the vineyard. What's fascinating, not only does she love the wine itself, but the grapes are just really delicious also. It's just a really interesting varietal. So what happened is that in 2016, it had been something that I'd been thinking about, but we just have this 1.07 acres in our estate, as I had mentioned, and we've always blended it into the Spottswoode Sauvignon Blanc. And I had always thought, well, I just sort of had this thought, not always, but I had thought of it, more recently, like it would be great to make something in honor of my mom that would be, from 100% from our estate, and just a really small production that's for top people on our mailing list, by which I mean people who buy from us directly, who are either what we call top spot, which are people that buy a full case of Cabernet from us on an annual basis, or spot on, of course, SPOTT, we have to have the play on words. Spot on means you buy 6 bottles or more a year. They're offered the ability or the opportunity to buy this wine. So what we do is we pick all of the Mary's Block, of course, together, and then we bring some of it aside, and we just give it a little bit of a different fermentation treatment. It's all in French oak, some new, some used, and we bottle about 120 cases equivalent each year. We bottle it in 3 bottle cases, and it's just an absolutely lovely. It's a special label that has a nice image it's a drawing of my mom and her dog Riley. And then she was such an avid gardener that she's carrying like a basket in her hand and a shovel because
nice.
Her gardening. And so it's a wine that means a lot to us. Our first release was 2016, which is the year that my mom died. She actually died of cancer unexpectedly in September. Sorry, I'm going to get sad. So my hope had been that she would be able to enjoy this wine. Our first vintage being the 2016, she was not able to, but we made it in her honor, and so we continue to make it. It's something that we feel very strongly about, and of course I have a strong emotional tie to it.
Yeah, that's a nice story. Thank you for telling that. Here's a comment from Robert Jung, who is, I guess, from London.
Yes.
And he says, "Mary and the story of Spottswoode is so special and enduring. And Mary's Block is proper testament to her. Perfect tribute."
Thank you, Rob. He's amazing.
Great. Here's another question, and I'm probably going to pronounce his name wrong. It's Dhiren, Dhiren Bhatia, Bhatia. He wanted to know, did the 2017 fires in Napa have any impact on your wines?
You know what? We were very lucky. They did not. So we literally had finished bringing in our fruit from our estate the day before the fire started.
Wow.
So, I mean, obviously by pure luck, we tend to pick for. I know there were a lot of grapes left out on vines here. We tend to, because we're looking for that freshness and tension and energy that I mentioned earlier, that we tend to bring our fruit in more timely than some. And we just happened to finish bringing it in the day before. So the people who were impacted by the fires, obviously we had smoke in the valley. It was a frightening time. These fires have been a big wake up call. Mother Nature is clearly a little angry with us,
Yeah.
and she's letting us
Sounds
know
like it, yeah.
that we're not taking good care of her. But all of our wines were in tank. They were undergoing fermentation.
Good.
We were not impacted by the fires directly, which was very fortunate for us.
Well, in Napa, weren't most of those fires down in the southeastern part?
No, they were all around.
Were they? Okay.
There was the fire up near Calistoga that blew into Santa Rosa. That's the one that caused so much damage in Santa Rosa. So we had one to our north, basically due north, and then we had one in Atlas Peak, so to our southeast, and then we had the ones over in Sonoma that were coming up over the Mayacamas range, and those were to our southwest. So we were surrounded.
Oh wow!
On all sides. It was very, very scary. It was very smoky in this valley.
Yeah, and the fact that you had no grapes on the vine, that's tremendous good fortune.
And again, by pure luck.
That's great. There's a comment here from Robert Hulsey. He says, "We are drinking your 1999 Spottswoode right now." I don't know if he means the Cabernet Sauvignon or the Sauvignon Blanc, but
I would assume Cabernet.
Okay, probably. But anyway, thank you, Robert.
That's great. That 99. Honestly, I have to tell you, Robert, that vintage is, I think, Rosemary Cakebread, who made our wines during that time. That first of all, the 99 is really important because it was the first wine that we made in our estate winery. So we built our winery, finally started in 98, and it was done in 99 because we custom crushed from 1982 all the way through 1998. So 99 was our first in our estate winery. And for Rosemary Cakebread, who was our winemaker at the time, and who just made some astounding wines for us, she's spoken about that being sort of her favorite vintage in a sense that she made. And she did a lot of vintages for us. It was a cooler year, smaller berries, just the elegance and the sort of the cool and kind of that classic, what I call blackberry pie sort of spice. I mean, just sort of it all came together in just this lovely, a lovely wine. So it's one that we're really excited about. So I'm glad you're excited.
That's great. Let's another question here, but I'll ask that in a little bit. We'll talk about the estate Cabernet, but the second wine is the Lindenhurst Cabernet. And I understand that name came from the fact that there were linden trees in the area, and it was an old name.
So, yeah, exactly. When the estate was established in the late 1800s, George Schonewald named it Esmeralda. And at that time, there was not a stone wall, nor was there a gate. It was just the estate was established, but he named it Esmeralda, which means the emerald in Spanish. And then he and his wife, Catherine, owned it and ultimately sold it in 1906 to a family who named it Stonehurst. And then in 1908, that was just a quick ownership. It was sold to a family that named it Lindenhurst. And that was after some linden trees that are still on the property that actually surrounded what was an old gazebo. That gazebo, the center pole of the gazebo is still there, but not the gazebo itself. It wasn't even there when we moved there. But it was called Lindenhurst from 1908 until 1910. And then in 1910, a woman named Mrs. Spots purchased the property, and she named it Spottswoode. So when my mom and dad bought the property 62 years later, it was named Spottswoode. But what happened with Lindenhurst is that it was actually in 02, also with Rosemary Cakebread, where we had been replanting the vineyard. We had some young vines, and then also combined with that, 02 was a sort of a hotter harvest year. So we had some really great wine in barrel, but because of our desire always to keep just this core density and this core signature of what we think Spottswoode is, some of the fruit and some of the wine that we had didn't fit that profile. So Rosemary said, this is extraordinary wine. We really should bottle it and sell it, basically as a classic declassified wine, just like they do in Bordeaux, right? Where you have your second and third label. So we made the decision to bottle it starting in 2002. And And so we decided to name it Lindenhurst because of its tie to the historic estate. Over time, it's changed a little bit. We do buy some fruit from the outside, and it is our Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. Again, just a couple thousand cases a year, and it is in essence it is designed to be, or I should say, crafted to be a bit more fruit forward, a bit more approachable, something that you can enjoy more often and a bit sooner than your Spottswoode, for example, which has a much longer sort of cellar ability. But of course, any wine you can drink whenever you want if you just
Of course. Long as it's well made, balanced, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And the Lindenhurst has about 10% Merlot in the blend?
Yeah, something each year it's a little bit different. We get, so just like with the Sauvignon Blanc, we buy from very specific growers every year with whom we have relationships. And we get both Merlot and Malbec from a vineyard called Young Inglewood, which is kind of right behind Press Restaurant, just south of St. Helena.
Okay.
And so that's where we get that. And it is about 10% in there. The proportions change annually, but it's about that.
Okay. And you released, that's the 2017 vintage, as is the current estate Cabernet. You released them at the same time, is that correct?
Now we're releasing, so the Sauvignon Blanc is released generally July 1st. So that's from the 2019 Sauvignon Blanc. It was just bottled in March. So it'll be released on July 1st officially. And then the Lindenhurst we're now releasing at that same time frame. And then the estate Cabernet is released on September 1st. That's to the market, to people on our mailing list. We offer the wines sooner. We send out our newsletter and offering in just usually very beginning of March. And the notion there is to offer it to our mailing list so that we can ship it in the cooler spring months, as opposed to waiting until the summer or waiting until the fall when the wine's already out there. And so it's around shipping and getting it to people earlier.
Right. How many people on your mailing list, by the way?
We have about 8,000 people on our mailing list, and about 2,000 of those, and we continuously cull it, and about 2,000 to 3,000 of those are very, very active. And then others buy, here and there, but they're all important.
And does your mailing list include people from out of the country?
Yes, it does. Yes, in fact, Rob Young is our perfect example. He's on this call now, and he's an incredible supporter of ours, and he lives in London.
Well, that's great. That's great. Let's move to the next wine, and we can compare, since it's the same vintage, that the new release of the estate Cabernet is also 2017. So tell us a little bit about that growing season. I understand it was rather warm. Maybe that was an understatement.
Exactly. 2017 was extraordinary for its heat spikes. So we had over Labor Day here in Napa Valley, we had a day where it was 117 degrees Fahrenheit. That's
my goodness.
That is desert heat. That is not sort of 50 to 60 miles as the crow flies from the Pacific Ocean heat. But again, we touched on climate change earlier. These are the type of extremes that we're getting. So, and around that one day, which was over Labor Day weekend, there were, it was over 100 during the day for sort of 4 days prior and 2 days after. So it was a fairly long stretch of a very hot week. So what happened, interestingly, is that the vines, we're very fortunate because we're organic. This is our belief, because we've been farming organically since 1985, and we've been biodynamic since 2008. Our vineyard has some real resilience in it. It just seems to have an intrinsic health and intrinsic power and strength. And so it made it through with good vineyard management by Aaron Weinkoff, who is our vineyard manager and winemaker. By the way, I take no credit for what's in the bottle here.
Okay.
So with that really great oversight, we made it through that hot spell. The grapes were not ripe, so we weren't trying to rush out to pick them prior because we couldn't. They weren't ripe. We had to let them make it through that. Gave them a drink of water before it happened, so that when it was over, they might be able to draw from that. Because when it's that hot, the vines don't take up that water anyway. They're just protecting themselves. They stop respirating. They just have to shut down and take care of themselves. But what happened is that, interestingly, the grapes that were on the vine, they did continue to develop sort of phenolically. So there were parts of that developed, but what didn't happen is that, interestingly, sugar didn't go up. The bricks did not increase in the grapes. Really? So they kind of stalled out where they had been, which was at about 23 and a half. But the phenolics developed. It was fascinating. So this wine, I think it's 13.7 alcohol. Pardon me for, yep. It's 13.7 alcohol, so it's below 14. It's below 14, interestingly, because of heat, not because of cool. The last time we were below 14, we're usually around 14.1 to 14.3 in our alcohols. The last time we were below 14 was in 2011, but that's because 2011 was an unusually cool year and the grapes couldn't ripen. So
Right.
it's really fascinating. The 17 is, you know, what is so amazing. I think it's one of the wines of the vintage. At least that's what it's been spoken about. Aaron is very talented. I just want to add that. I feel very fortunate that he works with us. And 17 is just, it's a really beautiful wine. It has immense staying power. It has immense, it has its own type of density. It's not as deep, and it doesn't have that core that say the 16 or the 15 had because of that fruit and sort of what came in. It's a to say lean, it's relatively lean. It's a leaner profile, more direct in a sense. It's really a beautiful wine. Very much in the Spottswoode family. Very much shows its vintage and of course its site. And that's actually the purpose of a wine, is to show what happened in that growing season and to illustrate that in a bottle.
Well, that's great to hear, because I concentrate a lot on Italian wines and some French wines too, but that's a very European way of looking at things.
Yes, exactly.
Is that sense of place. And
that's exactly what we are.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, 2017 naturally followed 2016, which was really one of the great vintages in recent time, wasn't it?
Yes, it really was. And we had back-to-back great vintages. Actually, since from 2012 through 2016, it was just an incredible run of vintages. The 18, which we've been actually doing blending sessions on, we were doing that earlier this week. Aaron and myself and the winemaking team, James and Corinne and Molly, have been tasting those blends, and the 18 is looking as good as the 16. It's quite remarkable. That same type of density and core. It's a beautiful wine too.
Great. I remember I tasted it however long ago it was and wrote about it on Forbes, and you were very kind to send a nice email, but I just thought it was.
No, you wrote about the 16 very nicely. Thank you. We do appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. So let's go to this question we have. This is from Randy Chappell. I guess this is his last name, Chappel. Randy, hope I pronounced that right. He said, how often do you break out older vintages for yourself? And when you do, how do you, quote unquote, prepare them before you drink? Decanting, drink them straight out of the bottle, etc. I just opened a 1994 while watching, so really thinking about the early 90 vintages, the early vintages of the 90s in particular, but also 2001, 2002, etc.
So how often do I pull out older bottles? Not as much as I would like. I love the older bottles. For if we have special guests for dinner, if we have a business function, things like that, that's when I feel like we can bring them out, because our library is not as we have a library, but we really need to be we're careful with it just to make sure.
I could imagine, yeah.
But in terms of, so I love the opportunity to open the older bottles. I love to see what they've done and what their nuances are and what's happening. We do every year do a vertical that goes back 15 vintages. So, you know, that's really great. And then we publish those notes and what we're thinking about their drinkability and all that in our newsletter every year. And that's to help our customers get a sense of where those wines are, but we don't go back into the 90s anymore. And obviously into the 80s, there's so few left out there. In terms of, but I love drinking those older wines. I mean, in terms of how to prepare those, I always really do a gentle decant on those older wines, because they're going to have thrown sediment. So in an ideal world, you know that you're going to open them. You stand them up 2 or 3 days in advance to let the sediment, any sediment that's going to settle down the bottom. I always decant it, since I cellar the wine with the label up. I always decant it with the label down, so that any of that crust that's been captured in the bottle from laying down stays up on top. I really gently decant it. When I start seeing any sediment, obviously I stop the decant. Right. And then what I generally do is then I'll clean out the bottle with water, shake it, pour that out. Now I like to pour the wine back in the bottle, because I always like to pour wine out of the bottle, but sometimes I'll just pour it right out of the decanter too. The older it is, the less long you want to leave it in the decanter before you enjoy it. But actually, that's just not true. But like we just had somebody who opened our 88, which was a really tough vintage here in Napa County. It was a really hot year, and it was one of Tony's wines. And he opened a Magnum, and he opened it. He's been a friend of the winery for a long time, and he said, I didn't really like it at first, and then he actually ended up writing about it, kind of put it in his cellar. Well, actually, he coravanned it. He thought, okay, it's going to be great. Then he opened it, and it was like, that's not quite what I thought it was going to be. Put it away in his wine closet, standing up for a number of days. Came back to it literally like 3 days later, and opened up. Was like, wow, what just happened here? So the thing with older wines is to not, if when you first open them and you decant them, and if they're not showing if they're not quite there, just give them a little bit of time, because they do come around. It's quite a remarkable, they're living, breathing things just like we are, and they do come around. They have their moments when they're less attractive, and then there are moments when they're in better moods and they're more fun to be around.
There you go. And it's always nice to have a little sense of mystery about it, isn't it? So
exactly.
You never know. A couple comments here. This is from Robert Saltman, and he puts it down to all families.
Hey.
He says, I've been sharing Spottswoode Cabernet with friends for 25 years, and it never ceases to amaze me how overwhelmed they are with his friends, I'm assuming not the wines, but how overwhelmed they are with the incredible excellence. The best quote was, quote unquote, heaven in a glass. So that's a nice.
Thank you, Robert. Robert Saltman has been drinking our wines for a long time. Thank you for that.
Okay, and here's a question from Robert Hulsey. He says, what's the peak year for the 2017 Spottswoode Cab?
The peak year?
Yes.
Meaning when would you recommend drinking it?
I don't know. We can ask him to type it in, but maybe he means at what point would be the peak drinking in terms of
right. Okay, like the peak
peak
drinking time. So I would say generally with our wines, if you like wines young, this was just bottled in July of 2019. So right now, if you were going to open this, I would suggest a decant and to let it sit for like 3 or 4 or 5 hours. I mean, I just poured in a decanter and put something over the top of it and just, kind of shake it around, let it aerate a bit. Taste some right then, because you want to educate yourself along the way, but then let it sit for a while and kind of keep going back to it. It will open up. What generally seems to happen is about a year after the wines have been in the bottle, they tend to start. So when they're in the barrel, they're in just a really happy place, right? Then you take these wines and put them in a bottle. The long chains go into short chains. They kind of get in this tight sort of stage for a while. They're not that generous or very friendly, and then they start to open up again. So generally it's like a year after they've been in the bottle, for about 2 or 3 years after that, they show beautifully again. They show kind of that freshness and kind of what they were showing in barrel, and then they kind of go into what we call their teenage years. They get kind of angular and gawky and a little bit off for a while, kind of trying to find their way, and then 2 or 3 years later, they kind of start coming out of that, and they start showing beautifully. So what wines do I think are a little bit awkward right now? I'd say the 15 might be just a teeny bit awkward. The 16 is still showing beautifully, but will go into an awkward stage. The 14 has just been showing beautifully. 13 is tight as nails. It's a beautiful wine, but wow, does that vintage need time. And the 12 is showing well, really, really well, and so is the 11. But as they into the 2010, 2009, 2008, all those wines are just, I think sort of the sweet spot is that 8 to 15 years time frame.
Okay.
They're great. After that, our wines will age for a lot longer than that, but you have to be a person like I am who enjoys wines with more of those tertiary characteristics. And for example, my husband does not appreciate that as much. So it just depends on your palate.
That's what makes life interesting. So
exactly.
Here's a question from Dennis Kajewski, and he says, I love the Lindenhurst, ! These are categorized as approachable in their early years, but how long can I age these?
So I think Lindenhurst is, thank you for noting that. Lindenhurst will age, I think its magic window is sort of that 5 to 8 year time frame. It is meant to be more fruit forward, more approachable, just a little bit more ebullient out of the glass early. And I think it has a good 5 to 8 years. I wouldn't tuck it away and try to put it away like you would a Spottswoode or any other wine like that, because that's not what it's built for, even though it will hold up, because the acidities are really good, and there's good tannin structure, and there's great balance. And as you know, Tom, from all the tasting you've done, so much of aging wine is about balance in that wine to start with, right? I mean, if it doesn't have balance to start with, it's not going to achieve it elsewhere. It's not there to start with. It's not there down the road. But I'd say, yeah, in that you can enjoy the Lindenhurst from the time that you get it. And I would say you can have it for, yeah, 5 to 8 years would be more than safe.
Okay, great. We have about 5 minutes left, so I just want to touch on
Wow.
I know, well, this has really flown by, and I can tell you, it was conducting this and just interviewing you, this has been a dream, because I ask a question and you answer it thoroughly and engagingly and clearly, and you have a lot to say. So.
And I actually answer the question, which, a lot of people don't anymore. I'm just kidding. It's like,
all right.
You hear a question, it's like, go somewhere else.
Right. You mentioned Aaron Weinkauf is your winemaker. And of course, I want to mention one point, because he graduated from Fresno State. And I know the Fresno State people always want to point that out, that, UC Davis is not the only school and theology school in California, but he joined you, in 2006, is that correct?
He joined us exactly in 2006 as assistant winemaker to Jennifer Williams, and then he became our winemaker January 1st, 2011. He was our winemaker. So he finished the 10 vintage and the 2010 vintage, and he has made every vintage since. And he's also our vineyard manager. That's important to point out. So when Tony established that as our norm for how we operate, it has always been that our winemaker and vineyard manager are one and the same person. And so he plays both of those roles. He also works with all of our growers for the growers that we have, the 4 growers for our Sauvignon Blanc and the 4 growers for our Lindenhurst. He works directly with them too. So he's deeply engaged in both the growing and the winemaking.
Okay. And there's obviously, as you mentioned, your wines represent a sense of place. The wines speak of that particular vineyard and your estate. So there's that thread with all of your wines from when you started to now. When you hire a new winemaker, and you haven't had too many, but I mean, is it a very difficult decision? I mean, do you talk to them about what they want to do, or is it more them just kind of hands off?
No, there's definitely a discussion. The nice thing is that it's been sort of always a baton pass. So Aaron had been here for 4 full years and had a great sense of Spottswoode and what we were trying to achieve before he took on as winemaker. Jennifer had been working with Rosemary, so when she took over, so it's been more of a baton pass. We also just make sure that we educate people in our winemaking team on all of the wines and sort of where they've all been, so that they can see that progression even back to the 80s, so that you get the sense of, because you need to have that really strong sense of where it's been and where we're going, because you want to have that clear vision. And then what we also do is we work with somebody, a man from France named Alexander Schmidt, for tasting. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to taste with him. Usually it's always in January and then in May, but obviously he can't be here this year. But trying to always make sure that we all taste these wines together. I'm part of these tastings as well. But we taste these wines together, but have something from the outside to make sure that we never get sort of that tunnel vision or ivory tower. We also put a lot of time and effort into, we host tastings once a month of wines from other places. We do comparative tastings. So we want to know what other people are doing too, and and we put our wines in it blind, so that we can have that real honest discussion about our own wines. So we just make sure that we really keep ourselves fresh and looking at other things, and not just allowing ourselves to become too tunnel vision in any way.
Okay. One last comment, and then I'll have one last question for you. This is comments from Robert Jung. To everyone watching, he says, I wish you both to be safe and to be healthy. And if Spottswoode needs to encourage more sales, Beth knows where to find me. Best wine ever, particularly including the family. The world needs more like this. And when I drink to the death of COVID, it will be Spottswoode.
Rob, you are the best. Thank you very much. And he lives by, I mean, he's in London and then is Toronto also, and he is the most amazing supporter, and I cannot tell you how much I truly appreciate that, Rob.
That's great. I appreciate him tuning in today. We have a real nice...
And I promise I didn't pay him to say any of this.
Okay.
That was all. That's very, very nice.
But we have a good number of participants today, and I think that's a tribute to your wines and to you and your sister and your family. So.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And on that note, my last question is, we have like 2 minutes left, is can you just give me some memories of your mother?
Oh, she was the best. I mean, I think, yeah, and I will try not to get teary, because she and I, we worked together for a long time, and I would say she was such an immense inspiration. She was not loud, but boy, was she strong, and you knew how you knew how she felt, you knew where she was. And I would say her, you know, she just had this indomitable spirit about her. She was always moving forward. She was looking ahead. She had always had a nice outlook, but a realistic outlook. You know, she was a very real person. She didn't have any, she had great humility. She had no airs about her, and had no interest in people who did have airs about them. She just was true to who she was, and what she believed in, and a great friend to many people, a great mother. I mean, I just can't say enough positive about her. She was remarkable, and I miss her a lot.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists that tuned in today, participants, excuse me. And Beth, thanks to you. This was really great. We could probably do this for another hour, but my subscription only lasts for 1 hour with these webinars. So, but maybe we can do it again sometime. But thank you.
Would love that, Tom. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to everybody in the audience who took the time to listen to this. I really appreciate it. I know everybody's extremely busy, and your time was valuable, and I just want you to know how much we appreciate your interest and support, interested in support of what we do here. We're proud of it, and we appreciate you being a part of it, being a part of our family.
Great. Let's all meet at Spottswoode soon.
I like that idea very much. You're all invited.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye.